Hello, my name is Daniel Sweetser, and I'm reading from my novel Hope Starts Small. And I'm reading two two parts today because the first one's rather embarrassing, and I don't want to end with it. All right, the mower. The lady who had lived in the barn before Frank and his family moved in had left a number of things behind. It took some time, maybe 2 months, before she came to retrieve them. And during this time they had been sequestered in the shed and left alone, at some cost to Frank. He had all kinds of random garden equipment he had yet to use, and without the shed it meant that his office, parts of Oma's place downstairs, as well as the patio, were littered with boxes that would best have been placed in the shed. One other reason why Frank wanted to use the shed was because he knew he would need a mower. And not just any mower, he would need one of those fancy riding mowers. He had been gifted one by his brother-in-law when they were in the house in town, but Frank hadn't taken good care of it. It eventually fell into disrepair, stopped running, and was given away to a dad who wanted his son to have a summer project. So Frank hunted online now for a new mower with a price range that all but guaranteed whatever he got would be suspicious. His best lead early on was a post by a man who appeared to repair old mowers for fun and profit. But Frank's communications with the seller were confusing. He never spoke with the man, only with what may have been his daughter. Their available times were odd and sporadic, and Frank never actually met with them. Instead, perhaps in God's mercy, Frank ended up meeting a man who sold new mowers for a living and had his own personal one that he was selling on the side. It was old and needed a little work, but the seller agreed to fix it up in advance of the sale. And so it happened that when the former owner came to get her stuff, as she was emptying out the shed, at the exact same time Frank's new mower was being delivered. And when the lady left, carrying with her the heavy memory of her and her husband's home, Frank had a place to park. The mower was clean and simple. Frank appreciated that. He ran into trouble the first time he mowed, but he completely understood the problem, and it was something he could manage, just a loose plug. The mower served Frank well, but it had one funny quirk to it. It had a slow leak in the front right tire. Frank didn't know how to fix a slow leak in a mower tire, and he didn't look it up. Instead, he would just inflate the tire before each time he mowed. Now, this might have been fine if the tire had remained inflated for as long as it needed to be, but instead, especially later in the summer, it tended to deflate slowly but surely throughout the mowing process, causing there to be awkward, uneven ridges in the result. This bothered Constance and Frank, but not enough for him to bother fixing it for good. Instead, Frank came up with a less reasonable plan. The mower had a very wide deck, maybe 50 inches, but Frank discovered that if he only used the very far right edge of it, regardless of how much the tire deflated, the result in the lawn would always look clean. And so Frank began to mow in inches, slowly creeping in as he went around the yard. The result was immaculate, but took 4 times as long as if he had just fixed the stupid tire. It cost him time, of course, but it also cost him something else. The mower was a rough ride, and taking 4 times as long to finish made it even rougher. And so late in the summer, Frank managed to injure his rear end, producing something that a doctor described as a fissure, likely as a result of taking so long to mow the lawn. He had literally ripped himself a new one because of his insistence on working with a flat mower tire. I don't want to end it there. So this is Chapter 8, Part 4, Stakes. Early on, Frank had gotten antsy and had decided to stake out the field as an exercise. The whole field was roughly 85 feet by 110 feet and would translate into 12 rows of blueberries 6 feet apart. Of course, Frank had done this way too early, well before he was ever actually in a position to plant. But for some reason, it had helped him at the time mentally to start to see the field. He kept doing this as time went on, a sort of shaping and marking territory in a desperate attempt to make progress. He wanted to do the work, but it wasn't time yet. First, it was too cold. Then, as time went on, there were other clear impediments, like the plants being too young, or the weeds in the field, or the lack of a large amount of pine bark mulch he would ultimately need. But he did it anyway, and it caused him some minor trouble over time. For example, staking out the rows for the blueberries had little immediate benefit, but the presence of the stakes made it nearly impossible to clearly mow the empty field. And so the stakes resulted in large, awkward patches of tall grass throughout, which Frank could not easily clear. He was insistent on keeping the stakes in the field, though, and so he just let it stay messy. There were other measures Frank took early on as well. At one point, he decided to try and mark the fence line with grass clippings. The intent was to kill the grass along the fence line in advance of when he would actually put the fence in, so that it would be weed-free when he was ready. In reality, he ended up needing to remove all of that before the fence was installed, because the clippings had made it impossible to mow cleanly along the line and had resulted in more growth, not less. Frank had intended on planting the blueberries directly in mulch, and so along this line of reasoning and with his proclivity for premature and partial measures, he had at one point taken his 1.5 bags of mulch left over from the house in town, and he had dumped them at the start of the first blueberry row. It was a sad sight, half the height he wanted and only stretching 3 feet long. Frank's neighbor across the street must have looked at things like this with dismay. The concern was that Frank would not finish what he started, and while there was a real risk that a finished product would be an awkward eyesore, it would be much worse if all that came about was the smattering of baby steps he had done to date. But for Frank, these small half measures were essential. They were like the little licks of flame that come out of a newly started fire. They were the hot coals of this dream of planting a field, and they gave some comfort to Frank. It was as if he was trying to convince himself that he would in fact finish what he started. His fear was that he would have moved his family to the barn and done all the work of starting and caring for the seedlings, only to not finish what he set out to do. At one point early on, Frank's 2 brothers-in-law and their families had come to visit. Frank showed them the field and then said something to the effect of, "I haven't done much yet, but I will." To which one of the brothers-in-law replied, "You just got here. Don't worry about it." This was, of course, the right answer. Things take time. Seeds grow slowly. Hope starts small. And Frank, for all his bustling, could never successfully hurry that along, no matter how hard he tried. From time to time, Frank would just walk in the field in the early morning. It was as if he was trying to dream into existence what he hoped would be. The undone work drove him a little crazy. But intermittently, the beauty of the field itself would become apparent to him, and he would enjoy just standing there in the grass, taking in the quiet beauty of what was to him a blank canvas. But he really wanted to start painting. All right, thanks for listening. I hope you have a great day.